There are initial details on the impact of US and European sanctions against Russian oil companies, and it is quite tangible. Oil exports are the foundation of Russia's arrogance, and if sanctions are maintained and strengthened, Russia will suffer significant losses. They could amount to at least $50 billion next year, which is a strong argument for Russia to develop a motive to end this war. Ukraine is already in contact with the European Union regarding the 20th sanctions package. We are submitting our proposals. We are also engaging with the American side. We count on key states to maintain this course of action. We already see that there will be a reduction in imports of Russian oil by India and China, and it is important to ensure that there are no sanctions loopholes through third countries. A reduction in Russian oil means a reduction in Russia's war, and there must be no exceptions to this for anyone, including Hungary.
Russia is set to lose $50 billion next year from the latest US sanctions. China could force Moscow to halt the war in Ukraine. President Trump pressed Xi Jinping on this matter. Meanwhile, Trump orders US nuclear drills in response to Putin's military exercise. What are the real impacts of US sanctions on Russia, and why has Trump launched nuclear drills? The Trump administration new sanctions on Russian energy, Rosneft and Lukoil, are delivering a major blow to Moscow, threatening billions in revenue from the country's key oil sector. Over 2 trading days, Rosneft and Lukoil lost around $5.2 billion in market capitalization, with Rosneft shedding $1.5 billion and Lukoil dropping $3.6 billion. The sanctions compound already weak performance for Russia's oil companies. Russian oil and gas sector accounts for roughly a quarter of the federal budget and about 20% of the GDP. Ukraine warns that if fully enforced, sanctions could cut 60–70% of Russia's oil exports to major buyers such as India and China, potentially costing Moscow up to $100 billion annually. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said US measures could cost Russia at least $50 billion next year. Rosneft and Lukoil together produce about half of Russia's oil output. Sanctions bar the companies from US banking system and include the threat of secondary sanctions against foreign banks or buyers facilitating transactions. Key questions include whether India and China reduce purchases from the sanctioned firms, whether banks and insurers cut services, and whether Russia can redirect exports via shadow fleets or alternative buyers. US President Trump said Thursday that he and Chinese President Xi Jinping discussed the war in Ukraine at length during their meeting at the APEC summit in Busan, describing the talks as very strong and suggesting China could play a key role in bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. Quote, "We talk about Ukraine for a long time," Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One. "We're both going to work together to see if we can get something done," he said, adding that he was confident China could help resolve the Russia-Ukraine war. The discussion marked one of the few times in recent months that Trump has publicly addressed the war through the US-China cooperation. Earlier in October, Trump said he and Xi had very productive phone call about the need to bring the war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. China's cautious position, official statement after the Busan meeting were restrained. Chinese state media said only that two sides had exchanged views on global stability without naming Ukraine. China has maintained what it calls a neutral stance on the war, urging a political settlement while continuing to buy Russian oil and other commodities, a position Western governments view as indirect support for Moscow. However, there was no joint communique, and US officials provided no specifics on how Washington and Beijing might work together on this matter. Analysts say the language may reflect the limits of US-China cooperation, given China's deepening energy and trade ties with Russia. Quote, "For Trump to suggest China will help end the war is politically useful, but strategically ambiguous," said a senior Asia analyst cited by Reuters. Still, The fact that Ukraine surfaced in a meeting dominated by trade and economic issues suggests both leaders view the war as a part of larger strategic landscape. Trump, who has repeatedly claimed he could end the war in 24 hours, may see Beijing's involvement as a potential diplomatic win at a time when Western support for Kyiv has grown uncertain. Whether that optimism will translate into actions remains unclear. No timeline, mechanism, or follow-up meetings on Ukraine were announced in Busan, and neither Moscow or Kyiv commented directly on Trump's remarks. For now, Trump's assertion that China could help end the conflict appears more aspirational than operational, a hint of diplomatic theater in a summit otherwise centered on tariffs, trade, and the fragile U.S.-China cooperation. Importantly, U.S. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping held their first face-to-face meeting in 6 years, striking what both sides described as a constructive and positive tone while announcing a limited another one-year truce in their country's long-running trade confrontation. The talks, which took place on the sidelines of the OPEC summit in Busan, lasted roughly 1 hour and 40 minutes, according to U.S. officials familiar with the schedule, shorter than the 3 to 4 hours Trump had forecast earlier in the week. It was 12 or 10, Trump told reporters aboard at Air Force One, calling Xi a tremendous leader. U.S. agreed to reduce average tariff on Chinese imports from 57% to 47%. In exchange, Beijing pledged to expand purchases of U.S. agricultural commodity, including soybeans and sorghum, echoing earlier deals struck during Trump's first term. China also agreed to suspend for 1 year its planned restrictions on the export of rare earths, minerals, and other critical minerals used in semiconductors and electric vehicles, a move that drew cautious optimism from U.S. manufacturers. The two leaders also discussed cooperation halting the flow of fentanyl and persecutor chemicals from China to U.S., a problem that has strained relations for years. Trump called the agreement a breakthrough, while Chinese state media described a shared commitment to protect lives and social stability. Technology tensions, however, remained unresolved. Trump said he played referee between China and major U.S. chip makers such as NVIDIA, but no new arrangements on semiconductors exports were announced. Also, Chinese Commerce Ministry separately noted that the two sides agreed to properly resolve issues related to TikTok, so it did not elaborate on this. Politico reported that understanding amounted to 1 year trade truce, whose details remain open, including how enforcement and verification would work. Sensitive topics like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China's energy ties with Russia were not mentioned. According to the Washington Post, U.S. officials viewed the limited agreement as a de-escalation step, not a resolution of the broader strategic rivalry. Trump, seeking to stabilize markets and reassure Midwest farmers ahead of the midterms, emphasized that American agriculture is back. Meanwhile, Chinese media framed Xi participation as a gesture toward mutual respect and stability in supply chains. Still, major U.S. outlets characterize the summit as a pause rather than peace. Le Monde called it a temporary lull, while Politico warns that without deeper structural reforms, the truce could unravel quickly. Both governments agreed to set up technical working groups to finalize tariff and trade details. For now, markets and diplomats alike are treating the Busan meeting as a welcome cooling-off period, but not the end of rivalry that continues to define global economics and security. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump has ordered Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing for the first time since 1992, saying U.S. must match the capabilities of both Russia and China. The announcement came shortly after dictator Putin oversaw large-scale nuclear drills. In a post on social media, Trump said, quote, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons. That process will begin immediately." He added that Russia is second and China is third, but will be even within 5 years. This week supervised Russia's strategic nuclear exercise involving missile launch by land, sea, and air. Moscow said drills were designed to test its strategic deterrent. Trump's directive would mark a major policy shift, ending de facto moratorium on US nuclear explosive testing that has been in place for more than 3 decades. Also, US signed but never ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The Pentagon and White House did not clarify whether Trump's order referred to full-scale nuclear detonation or subcritical tests, nor did they provide details on timing or location. China's foreign ministry urged Washington to abide by its moratorium commitment and warned that resuming tests could undermine global strategic stability. Arms control groups said the decision could provoke a new arms race, with the Arms Control Association calling the move dangerous and unnecessary. Analysts said Trump's order appeared timed to coincide with his meeting with President Xi in Busan, South Korea, and to project strengths following Putin's drills. If carried out, the decision would mark a dramatic reversal of decades of US nuclear restraint. It could heighten tensions among the world's leading nuclear powers. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.